Well, hello and good afternoon. Welcome back to the Money Advantage podcast. I'm so excited that the live stream is working today and we are live. So, Bruce, thank you for joining me for this important conversation today. We're talking about retirement plans. Many people believe that they are sufficient. Maybe you've been told that it's enough and it's turning out not to be. And so, we're talking about today, does your retirement plan need a reality check? So, excited to have you um, excited to talk about this important conversation today because I think this impacts so many people who are planning for the future, doing all the right things, thinking that they have everything under control. And really, what we want to do is help you be aware of the risks from the outside, not your own personal discipline and your own personal savings, but the risks on the outside that you might want to be aware of so that you can be better prepared. Now, Bruce, before we kind of dive into this conversation today, I'd love to hear your thoughts as you've done so much work with people around this idea, coming from this perspective and helping them to work through this. Let's just kind of set the stage for why this conversation matters so much.
Well, I think first of all, anything we talk about today is not advice because we don't know your specific situation, both mathematically and emotionally. And I think that's the point that I want to make to everybody. I was actually talking to somebody that I was mentoring last night, and we were talking about AI and how I don't feel like AI is I'm not afraid of AI taking over the financial services world because so much of controlling one's own finances is not just about the math of the money. It's also about the um, the emotional part, but also about how dynamic it has to be. So we can run what they call Monte Carlo simulations, where what they call back tests. They say, okay, if you put your money in here and you back test it for 50 years, in other words, those particular investments, when will I run out of money? You can run that all you want. And that they will come out to say you'll run out of money at age 90, or you have a 75% chance of not running out of money till 88. I mean, they'll give you all kinds of scenarios. The fact though that is a static scenario, and I've never worked with a family that was a static family. In other words, they did the same thing over and over. They did not have challenges to overcome, and frankly, they also have windfalls that they find out about, whether it's selling a business or getting an investment that actually works out better. I just talked to one the other day that had put $160,000 into a particular investment, and that investment had not performed. They actually stopped the distributions for years and years and years, and they had completely forgotten about it. But somebody came in and rescued it, and all of a sudden now the 160 turned into somewhere around $400,000, and they were given a check for $400,000 on money they had already forgotten about. So this is
That's
the kind of dynamic.
exciting, but
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
I think what you're saying is we expect life to do this, but there's a lot of things that are a lot taller mountains than we expect and maybe deeper valleys than we expect along the way.
yeah. And this is this retirement myth that people have been given by the financial services industry, frankly, from 1935 when Social Security came on, that says, this is the amount of money that you need to live this successful retirement. But there's so many factors involved in it, and there's pitfalls along the way that, number one, I think Nelson Nash said it very poignantly, that we shouldn't even be thinking about retirement. We should be thinking about continuing to contribute to society. And number two, if you do think about retirement, what does that mean for you? So that it's not just about having enough money, but it's also about having enough purpose in your life to live a wonderful and fruitful rest of your life.
Bruce, I wasn't thinking we were even going to go there today, but I mean, I think what you are saying is not only is there all the financial projections that are built on some faulty premises, but maybe the whole retirement idea in the first place is also built on a deeper level of faulty premises. And so that faulty premise being that one should stop working and that one should stop producing an income and live off of what you've made or earned up until that point, and hopefully had that perform well enough to continue providing an income. And so what you're saying resonates with me because that's also the foundation of everything we've shared from Rabbi Daniel Lapin and also Nelson Nash, this idea of continuing to be productive, continuing to create assets that provide an income, and continuing to think about how to use your time in a way to provide additional leverage and continue to bring in income well into your later years when you have the most value to offer. So, kind of as we're coming into this conversation today, maybe this is relevant to you because you're thinking about retirement or you're planning for retirement, you're thinking about retirement. A lot of people, most people, spend all of their working years contributing to retirement funds. We're going to kind of break all of these pieces down, but contributing to retirement funds with the assumption that it will be enough, that they will be able to put away enough money, have a great enough rate of return, be able to use a small enough portion of that in the future to make the money last. And that somehow this construct of retirement, of earning money, putting it aside, earning a rate of return on that, and then living off of a portion afterwards, that somehow that's going to give them financial freedom. And we're not saying it is wrong, but what if that assumption is wrong? So today we're going to be talking about some of the concerns, some of those underlying faulty premises that that model is built on. It can give you a false sense of security to think this way about the typical retirement planning paradigm. And so, what if it's based on outdated math? What if it's based on risky projections? What if it actually puts you out of control instead of in control? And so, today we're going to talk about why retirement funds might not perform the way you expect. We're going to talk about the reasons why they might not do that, how market volatility and tax risk can quietly erode that future income, and why the goal isn't just to retire, but to build financial freedom, financial independence that lasts not just for you, but also for generations into the future. So, if you have been saving money for decades and you've been faithful with putting that money aside, thinking from that retirement fund, retirement income paradigm, today is really a opportunity to rethink that so that you can make sure that what you're doing is leading truly to freedom. And so this conversation is going to help you have some fresh eyes to think about how you're planning for income throughout your lifetime. So Bruce, why do you think from the kind of beginning point of this whole conversation, why do you think there's this perspective of security when it comes to retirement planning in the first place?
Well, because the industry would not be able to get you to give them money in a systematic way over a long period of time and then trickle it back to you in a systematic way over a long period of time if they would say, well, these are the rules, but good luck. You know, they want to give you a sense of security with what they call back testing and what's commonly referred to as the 4% rule. And the 4% rule for our audience is simply that, okay, whatever you have in your portfolio, if you take 4% off at whatever given age, then you should have a 90+% chance of not running out of money because they back tested it with these what are called Monte Carlo simulations, where they're looking at all the different places you could put your money, and yet they put the money in a similar situation. What it doesn't take into consideration is, they might go back 50, 100 years on the Monte Carlo simulations, but your time period of retirement might be from age 65 to 80, which is only a 15 year period, because average mortality is less than 80. Okay, let's say it's even to 90. So that's a 25-year period, but they're using averages from 50 and 100 years. So then all of a sudden, if you get a downturn right after you retire, that mathematical formula for you doesn't work out the same as if you had a 50 or 100-year period. And we saw this in the 2000s when we had the dot-com crash in the beginning, and then the financial crisis, mortgage crisis in the 2000, where it was called the lost decade, where the S&P 500 only returned about 0.79% over that time period. And losing money early is actually a lot worse than losing a lot of money late, because you have to overcome these hurdles constantly and constantly and constantly. And then what that rule of 4%, as we continue to debase our money, to devalue our money, for what we thought when we were accumulating it was going to be a lot of money. But now we're 37 plus trillion dollars in debt, and we keep printing more and more money to pay for our debt. Our money's worth less and less. So now you're thinking 4% off of $1 million is $40,000. Well, that plus Social Security for a couple that might be somewhere around 5,000 a month, considering both of them, that's $100,000 to live off of. And some people, even just 10 years ago, would have thought, well, in retirement, 100,000 would probably, I'll be okay. But now all of a sudden, with how we've been devaluing our money since the financial crisis and COVID, all of a sudden that $100,000 is not worth anywhere near what it was 10 years ago. And so, but we haven't shifted our emotional brain to get over that fact. And so things have to really change. And so you can do one or two things. You can change your habits by putting more money away if you still want to retire. So you got to delay gratification even more. You can work with somebody that can maybe get you more than 4%. And 4% is what the general markets are supposed to produce. There's other ways to produce income than the general markets, which are called alternative investments, private investments. Now, you have to be an accredited investor to actually do those. But they have two benefits. One, they're outside the stock market, so they don't have the same type of volatility. I'm not saying they're without risk, but they're outside the stock market, so they don't have the same volatility. In other words, they don't go up and down, up and down, up and down. Number two is you actually gain you actually gain your net worth not from appreciation so much. In other words, the stock or the bond appreciating in value. You gain it from the cash flow that is produced from that particular alternative investment. And that cash flow that's produced, instead of being 4%, could be 6% on the low side, up to as high as 15, 18, 20% on the high side. Well, suddenly now you've killed two birds with one stone. You've taken sequence of return risk out of a portion of your portfolio, and you've blown the 4% rule out of the water. So you've taken volatility out of it, and you've increased your distribution percentage. And I even haven't talked about, and we'll get into this just a second, that 4% is from taxable accounts. Well, what if you could place your money in tax advantaged accounts where you don't need to make as much, or if you make more than that, it's actually a lot more spendable money that you have. We have a saying around our place that for every dollar we can save you in taxes is another dollar that you can spend, you can invest, or you can give away in a charitable donation. And it does not affect your current cash flow. So those are the mindset things that people need to overcome if they're going to try to have whatever a successful retirement is.
Bruce, there's so much you unpacked there. That was like a master class in itself, that last 5 minute chunk. So I didn't want to interrupt anything that you said, but you basically were showing that that paradigm is mathematical alone, which can the retirement paradigm can seem so secure because it's based on math. And when you put numbers in to a calculator and it gives you a concrete number to answer your calculation you've placed in, that gives you a sense of this must be true, it must be reality. But what you showed is all of the factors that are not taken into consideration with that mathematical example. If I could just make it super simple, 2 apples plus 2 apples should equal 4 apples. But what if you ate one along the way? What if someone stole that apple along the way? What if it rotted? What if somebody drove over it with a car? What if we're talking about 2 apples 500 years later, 2 apples? Well, that first 2 apples have produced multiple trees and multiple groves of apples by now. And so it doesn't, the math doesn't always take into consideration all of the additional factors. But what I thought was really interesting is then you were saying if you're going to solve this problem and actually ensure you have more security and making sure you have enough money at the end, you said I think you said there's 3 ways to handle that. You mentioned, well, you can save more ahead of time during your working years. You mentioned you can earn more on that money, or you could work longer, right?
Right.
And so those end up being the answers or the catch 22 that somebody finds themselves in. Well, maybe if I just save more, maybe if I just earn more on that money, maybe if I just work longer, I can make this paradigm work out. But when we look at those answers, you're saying there might be a better way. There might be a better way to think about taxes. There might be a better way to think about volatility. There might be a better way to think about control, because all of these put you in a better position if you can answer all of those other factors. I love what you talked about with inflation being a huge risk as well. And I think often we can't predict exactly what inflation is going to do. Again, we can look backwards and we can say, what has the average inflation rate been? But that does not give you a reality for the feel that that inflation will cause to your bank account when you go to the grocery store and all of a sudden, like during COVID, food cost twice as much as it did the year before. That is not usually factored into the formal government produced inflation numbers. Something else I wanted to mention, you said that losses early in your taking of income of that retirement account can cause you to have something that you have to continually overcome and overcome and overcome. And the reason for that is that if you lose 50%, it takes a lot more than a 50% gain to recover what you've lost. You have to actually have a 100% gain to recover back just to what you had lost. And that is something we often miss, how detrimental those losses actually are. It's not simply a matter of averaging it out with the mathematical numbers getting you an actual average. That does not mean that average return is going to apply to
Yeah,
your
and then
account.
if I can just quickly add something, so 50% loss, actually have to get 100% to get back to where you were. And that's if you haven't taken any distributions when you got that 50% loss. So that's why the loss is even more detrimental in retirement, because 50% loss, but then you decide you're going to take 4 or 5 additional percent off because you got to live off of that. And so now you're not down just 50%, you're down 54 or 55%. And oh, by the way, what if you had something come up and you needed more money that year? So you had to take you had to take 10%. So now you have 60% down that you have to overcome the 60 just to get an additional amount to get back to 100 is. And so
Mm.
losses
Yeah.
early are really, really detrimental. So how you need to have a plan for that. And the plan for that, Dr. Wade Fowles, been a friend of the podcast, and he's been on for 2 times, and he talks about sequence of return risk and having different buckets of money. And a lot of people think they should just have one bucket of money, and that's their retirement bucket. But you should also have an income bucket, and you should also have a free bucket that it's a liquidity bucket that you can use in times of sequence of return risk, so that you don't pull from that retirement bucket, you pull from another bucket that is protected from the downturn. And that can be a variety of different, it could be CDs, it could be money markets, it could be cash value life insurance, which he actually talks about. A really good thing to have is cash value life insurance, because not only can you pull from that time when your equity portfolio in retirement is down, but you can also then, when one of the spouses passes away, it can also then fill the equity bucket back up. And thus you can actually have a more comfortable retirement. So we often talk about at E3 Wealth is we also talk about the purpose of the money. We need to know the purpose of the money. So we use an acronym called LIFE. So what is the L stand for is liquid. How much money do you want to be liquid that you don't have to worry about, that you can just spend and use at any time? The I is the actual income. Okay. The income that you need to produce. The F is flexible so that you can use it for income. You can use it for your liquid money when you want. You really, you can use it for a variety of different purposes. And then the E, which a lot of our listeners actually care about, is the estate. What do you want to pass on to the next generation, and or the spouse that you want to protect? Um, I'm going to say his first name. I'm not going to say it the total name, but you'll know when I talked to John last week with his wife, he was adamant about that. He said the first person I want to state, and I want to pass this along to my kids, but I want to take care of her first, pointing to his wife. He was
Mhm.
like, that's the number one goal. And my kids know that she's going to be taken care of first.
And
So
I think that's
life decisions.
probably what most people would say too. I don't think that's an anomaly.
Yeah, I would say most, but not all, because what ends up happening is in a lot of spousal situations, they disagree with whether they should leave money to the next generation or not. So that always is a marriage counselor moment for me too, is to figure out if there's a compromise between. So life, liquid, income, flexible, estate. So the purpose of the money. What is the purpose of each bucket of money? Buckets of money that are tax free versus buckets of money that are tax deferred, or buckets of money that are taxable for that year. You have to decide what's the purpose. I've had dozens, if not hundreds, of clients in the past tell me, I want to go do this special thing with my family. I want to take them on a vacation, but I don't want to pull from this account because now I have to pay taxes. So they choose not to go on their vacation, or they choose to take a smaller vacation. So you have to set up buckets that have a purpose. And that doesn't come down to the 4% rule.
Bruce, I think that's what most people don't realize is how fragile the retirement system really is. And again, it can have this illusion of control, this illusion of certainty. And partially, I think this comes also from this feeling of empowerment of saying, I put this money over into this plan for my future. I've made a good decision. I've deferred gratification. I've set this into my retirement fund, my retirement savings. I think there's some sense of pride of saying, I'm doing good, I'm doing well for myself. And I think that's a good feeling to be able to have for yourself. And sometimes that maybe it could be done in a better way, that you could set those funds aside for the future or for some future use. But I think the challenge in the model is that we're doing these things. Most people around us are doing these same things. We get the retirement statement that says how much money is in that account. We think, oh, this is great. This money is growing. It's rising, especially in a market upturn. When things are going well, your money is growing. And then what you don't necessarily see is the potential volatility for the future. You don't see the tax implications that are coming down the road. You don't see the inflation implications. You don't see the potential for the timing or the sequence of risk return that you just mentioned, or the fact that you might need to tap into more of that account balance than you had intended. And with all of those challenges, it becomes much more fragile than we realize.
And I mean, there's other family things that come into play here. But before we do that, Rob, one of our listeners, says the sad part about inflation is that it's unlikely to actually improve or get better. That means we need nearly every dollar coming into our system to have the sum growth. And I would say, Rob, you're absolutely correct. I don't think they want it to get better. when I say they, I'm talking about people that manipulate the money supply, being the Federal Reserve and our United States government. Why? Because if they have this debt, they need to inflate the money supply so that there's more money in the system, thus goods and services go up. The goods and services go up, so then the corporations or businesses can make more money. When they make more money, they pay their they make a greater profit, thus taxes go up in volume wise, and they pay their employees more money. And so they get taxed on more money so that they can pay the actual debt that they are. I shouldn't say pay the debt because
They're not
uh,
really paying the debt.
they're not really paying the debt, but they're keeping the debt pseudo under control. And
Managing. Maybe they're managing the debt.
managing may be a better a way of saying that. Yes,
I think
but
go ahead, Bruce.
I think as we were looking at this at this episode, we were trying to what we don't want to we don't want to just have despair when we're talking about this. Is one thing I think that people need to do is they need to get themselves into a career or a business that they like, so that they don't feel like they have to retire, or they don't have to retire until for a while, because every year you delay retirement, that's another year you don't have to save for retirement. I don't know if people ever think of it that way, but not only are you contributing more to what you're going to use in retirement, but you don't have to distribute into retirement that year. So delaying retirement's good, but people they don't want to delay retirement because they're miserable with what they're doing. And I hear this from my clients who tend to be older because I'm older. They say, "Well, I don't really like my job, but I don't want to change jobs now because nobody's going to hire me." Well, I tell them all the time, "Well, with that attitude, you're right. Nobody's going to hire you." So doesn't mean you can't be looking for a job while you have the same one, or if your business is not doing well, you've got to try to do something to change your business. We had a Money Advantage client that came in Omaha, Nebraska, and they had two grocery stores and they were doing very, very poorly. And I'm not saying I thought about this for them. Oh, I did think about it. I'm not saying they took my advice. I think they were already thinking this way. It's like, why don't you close if they're both not doing well, why don't you close one and focus on just one grocery store and build that back up? First of all, it'd be half the effort, and you can actually put more thought into that. And that's exactly what they did. Now, time will tell whether it makes sense or not, but we get so into our lives. My dad used to always say this, Rachel, you can't see the forest for the trees. And I think that's what happens to people is they get so into the weeds that they can't see something out. And it's our job as somebody to inspire people to look at things differently.
Bruce, I think you're really right about that. And I think one of the things that we almost miss in this whole conversation is that the retirement model is so focused on accumulation. When I say accumulation, maybe what that sparks up for you in your mind might be, stockpiling, maybe the people who stockpiled toilet paper during COVID, or your grandma who lived through the Great Depression, and so she accumulates all kinds of things that she doesn't really need. That might be what your method of or your mindset is when I say accumulate. This, I don't know, I even think of like squirrels accumulating a bunch of nuts and they're preparing for the winter. Accumulation, though, the challenge with that is that what somebody is doing is they're trying to build up a pile of cash, a dollar amount that could be listed as, your assets under net worth. So that would be showing up on your balance sheet. This would be your assets and minus your liabilities. That equals your net worth. And you might be thinking, let me just build up this dollar amount in what my retirement accounts are. I'm just looking for that accumulation amount to go up. Kind of like, you're driving the car and you get on E and you didn't realize that you were so low on gas and the light comes on and how all of a sudden there's this warning light, but you look down and maybe you don't have that. The total opposite's there. Your tank is full. You remember you just filled gas. Looks good, feels good. That's kind of what I think of accumulation like. It's looking down and saying, how much gas is in the tank? Like, where are we right now? I see that amount. That amount makes me feel good. I'm good. The challenge is what we need to realize is all accumulation is doing is building up for us something that will in the future create cash flow. That's the goal. The goal is future cash flow. And cash flow is money that is going to be coming into your life and spent each month, or it's going to provide for those monthly needs, those annual needs, and be spendable resources. And the goal then, if you're working from the retirement model, is how do I use my cash flow today to build up this accumulation, this pile of assets, to somehow turn that or convert it back into cash flow or spendable resources in the future? The challenge is that if you're just looking at that accumulation amount, you might feel really comfortable with that net worth dollar. But if they're not movable resources, if they're not assets in your control, you can have a lot of things that cause you to be what we've seen somewhere. Sometimes people say is broke millionaires. You're in a position where you have the assets, you have the accumulation, you have the dollar amount in the tank, but it's not converting over into cash flow, or it's not able to turn into cash flow. It's not benefiting your life today, and it has the potential to not benefit your life as much in the future. But if we can shift that paradigm to say, how do we have the maximum cash flow today? And I don't just, okay, let me just say that statement first. Maximum cash flow today, maximum cash flow in the future. What I don't want you to hear me say is just make as much money as possible today, spend all of it, and make as much money as possible next month and spend all of it, and make as much money when you're 92 and spend all of it. That's not what I mean by cash flow today, cash flow in the future. I mean, how can we build assets that produce income, not just build up in that accumulation model? Bruce, is there anything that you would add to that conversation about focusing? I think if we shift the focus to cash flow rather than just accumulation, I think that begins to kind of chip away at that the faulty premise of the retirement model.
So, so what you'll find is alternative investments that focus on cash flow. First of all, you got to be an accredited investor. And if anybody listening doesn't know what an accredited investor under current SEC guidelines are, you have to make at least $200,000 as an individual and have the reasonable expectation of making $200,000 for 2 more years, or you make $300,000 as a couple and have a reasonable expectation of making $300,000 for the next 2 years, or have $1 million of liquid net worth. Liquid net worth would not include things like your home equity. So just as we talk about that, understand that not everybody can do this. Now, the reason alternative investments, I believe, should be a part of everybody's portfolio or thinking is they provide the cash flow that you're going to use for your own personal cash flow. And I think what's interesting is a lot of people envy business owners because they see them successful and they have all this cash flowing through the business. Well, all alternative investments are as a group of people getting together and investing into a business. And then that business provides cash flow to those individuals that invested their money into that business. So cash flow then becomes what you're worried about rather than I need to grow the pile of money by 5% so that I can only take off 5% the next year and live off of that. Here, we're not worried about the appreciation. If we get appreciation, that's great. And then oftentimes you do get appreciation also with those. And why do you get appreciation? What's interesting, Rachel, is people that want cash flow, like college endowments, like pension plans, and the last one, insurance companies. They see these and they say, hey, we're going to pay you a premium for that. And they buy them out because they have to produce cash flow for retirees that are actually have a pension, or an insurance company has to provide annuity returns that are guaranteed. So what's interesting is the three play are in a case of a college, they need to produce a cash flow to offset what they have to pay in tuition. It's crazy. A lot of places now it might be $80,000 to go there, but if they didn't have the cash flow off of the endowment, it might cost $120,000 to go there. So these companies that are really into providing guarantees are a benefit um, they're looking for cash flow. They're not looking for appreciation. I think it was I think it was Harvard or Yale. A they bought a forest in Michigan that whenever they needed cash flow, they just cut down some trees and sold the trees. They weren't worried about was that land going to go up in value in the future. And guess
Hmm.
what? If lumber prices were not good that year, they just didn't cut down the trees. And guess what happens to the trees? They grow bigger. And so the next time they do cut them down, they have more cash flow. So these are how businesses work. And I think if people change their mind from appreciation to cash flow, they would really change their outlook on retirement. And then the final thing I'd like to say is those cash flows can also be tax advantage because they're coming from a business. So there's expenses from them. And you can write those expenses off so you don't have to pay taxes on the entire amount. So there's a lot of advantages to having a portion of your portfolio into cash flowing investments. If you're doing it now, a lot of people I'm sure screaming at the podcast right now. Well, what about dividend paying stocks? What about bonds? They provide cash flow. And I would say yes, they do. They absolutely do. And that's good for another portion of your portfolio. But we've seen where bonds are very, very volatile. We've also seen where dividend paying stocks are very, very volatile. So you might be getting 8% dividend one year, but then you get a 4% dividend the next year. Still good cash flow, but you have to consider all the volatility. And the volatility comes from the private markets where you can buy and sell, buy and sell, buy and sell. Uh, the final thing I like to say about alternative investments, when you're looking at any place you put your money, you're looking at safety, liquidity, and growth. You're looking at three different things. And if you're not going to have liquidity, which is the middle rung, then what are you going to expect? You're going to expect some growth or some safety. So let's talk about a CD at a bank. Is it liquid? Technically, it's liquid. But you have to give up the growth. So it has lack of liquidity. So what are you expecting? I'm going to get some growth. Well, let's talk about an alternative investment. Is it liquid? Um, uh, if it's liquid, then you're not going to get as much growth. If it's not liquid, like an alternative investment, then you're going to expect a premium from that. And the sponsor of that can actually get you a preferred cash flow because they know you're not going to be able to just pull your money out at any time like it does in the stock market. So it's not magic. We say that all the time about life insurance policies and the infinite banking concept. It's not magic. These kind of things are not magic either. You're giving up things to get something else. But that is why we have to have the purpose of the money.
Bruce, I love that you brought in the purpose of the money earlier. I think this particular podcast is going to be so valuable for anyone to come back to. There's just so much packed in here. But one of the things we just separated out, extrapolated, think is the word for that, is the accumulation model versus cash flow. And we're not saying that you have to go 100% towards cash flow, but if you can at least recognize the place where accumulation, an accumulation mindset or 100% focus on accumulation may not be serving all of your needs, you can recognize that the opposite of that is cash flow. And if you have a purpose of creating cash flow on that money, you can have a little bit more control and more certainty. You also then had mentioned volatility versus guarantees. And I know that guarantees is something maybe that is challenging to say we can put a guarantee on almost anything in the financial world. Safety is maybe a better word for that. Safety versus volatility. When you're in a position of a lot of volatility, you don't have as much predictability about what that future outcome is going to look like. I love an article by Les McGuire we've linked to and we've talked about in this podcast before, but the economic value of certainty. What essentially that whole concept is about is when you have solid ground beneath your feet, you can make better financial decisions because you know that you're going to come back, you're going to land back on this solid ground. You're not going to lose money. You're not going to be concerned that it's going to vanish or it's going to fall out beneath your feet. It's the kind of certainty that you have that you can make better decisions when the lights are on, when, well, I guess when the sun is shining, when the road is clear ahead of you, there's no traffic and the road is straight versus driving on black ice in the dead of winter with no headlights. You're not going to drive as fast because there's not as much certainty. And so that volatility causes you to have to freeze up or have to be constricted in other areas of your financial life because you have to deal with the negative implications of what might happen if that volatility impacts you. Whereas when you have more safety, more guarantees, sure, you might be giving up growth, you might be giving up liquidity, but you're in a position where you can have more certainty. And you just need to recognize that certainty plays a huge role in your financial life of putting you in a position of control.
Now, just to add a little bit to that, so because of the lack of liquidity on cash flowing investments, you don't want them to be a more than about 25% of your portfolio, because as we started this whole podcast up or out, life is dynamic. It changes. So if you need all of a sudden to have a big, large piece of cash, then you don't want it to be in alternative investments, because there's different types of liquidity in alternative investment, but you certainly don't want that to happen. So you want, I'm going to come back to what I said again, you want different buckets for the purpose. What are their purposes in those particular buckets? And the final thing I'd like to touch on today is the guaranteed income that you can get through an insurance company. You can either get it through cash valued life insurance, or you can get it through a income producing annuity. And you said that a lot of people say, well, you can't use the word guarantee. And I've had clients tell me that all the time. Well, what does a guarantee really mean? The company could go under. And I'm like, well, regulators who are very strict have said that this company, compared to every other thing that you could put your money in, we say that they are strong enough to guarantee that cash flow. So it's a legal contract. Now, could hell in the to everything go hell in the handbasket and the entire society collapse? And well, then it doesn't really make any difference where you put your money. So it's compared to every
Sure.
other financial instrument that you have that guarantee. So there are guarantees out there relative to every place else that you can put your money. And those actually Ernst and Young did which by the way, they're not they're a consulting company. They're not a financial company, but they did a survey and they found that people that have guaranteed money coming in, whether it's a pension, whether it's from life insurance, or whether it's from an annuity or a settlement, then they actually enjoy a more successful and emotionally good retirement.
Mm.
Now you give up something for that. What do you give up? Yeah, the stock market could race away and you gave up some appreciation, but you did it to get cash flow. And a lot of people want a portion of their money guaranteed in that situation. So all these things have to be talked about in your retirement. If a person just says, we're going to put you in a 60-40 portfolio, we're going to use the 4% rule. Oh, that reminds me, Rachel. In about 2015, when the financial crisis caused bond rates to go down and stay down for a long time, suddenly there was article after article about from financial institutions says that the 4% rule is no longer valid. It has to be 2.8%. Well, then it's not a rule.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you can change a rule, it's not a rule.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the other thing to consider when you're looking for just appreciation.
Which leads you to believe that if they can change the rule from 4% to 2.8, what does that mean for your future? If you're allocating, I'm going to have 2.8% growth and I'm going to remove 2.8% of this growth as income, What if they change that to 1.5? So, Bruce, let's relate infinite banking to this. I know we've talked about cash value life insurance here and how there's guarantees of the amount of cash value. You can have income through that as well. But how can infinite banking be part of the answer to this question? Specifically, how can that complement retirement planning? I know you mentioned earlier about Wade Pfau and having that as a
Yeah.
source of consistent income and guarantees that you can use during the time of a downturn with your retirement plans. But let's just dig a little bit deeper into how can infinite banking be an answer to some of these concerns?
Yeah. So number one is if you can take the banking function in your life and not finance things through another institution and you take over the banking function, you're saving potentially the average of 34.5% flowing out of your control. And that's a volume. In other words, 34 on average, 34.5% of the volume of your money. So if you have $100,000, 34,500 money goes to interest to financial institutions in the American public. And people find that hard to believe. But when you start looking at your mortgage interest, your interest on student loans, your interest on cars, your interest on credit cards, I mean, you can start it can start piling up pretty dang quickly. So that's number one. If you can recapture that, well, then that's more money you can put away for the future. So that's going to help. Number two, we already talked about sequence of return risk, where you could, when your portfolio's down, you don't want to kick a man when he's down. In other words, so you're not going to take any money so that it doesn't have to overcome that 4 or 5% that you're um, that possibly could hurt you. So then having someplace else that you have money that you can pull from that's not at any volatility is a wonderful thing. And Dr. Wade Pfau actually proved this. The third thing is that you have the ability to spend more money, you and your spouse, or you just as a single person, but you also maybe want to leave for the kids. You have more to spend in retirement because you know the death benefit is going to fill the bucket back up. And so instead of using the 4% rule, you might use a 6 or 7% rule, knowing that you're going to almost run out of money at retirement. Or even if you do run out of money, you're going to have cash value over here to sustain you. And then when you do die, it fills it back up. So technically, infinite banking doesn't do those other things. Technically, the product that you use, which is whole life insurance, does that for you. And then the final thing is that Nelson Nash proved this in his equipment financing example, is that if you do the banking over your lifetime and you pay it back faithfully so that you recapture and you understand that all capital has a cost, then at time of retirement, you can actually take what he called passive income. He didn't like to call it retirement income. He called it passive income at whatever retirement date, tax free in the form of either distributions from the policy or policy loans. And you're still going to end up with a death benefit. So those are basically the four ways that you can implement that into your retirement planning.
Providing a lot more access to capital, a lot more certainty, providing an estate. So you're hitting a lot of those purposes of money, even with, I don't know if you would think of it that way, but you're hitting liquid money. You can use it for income. It can provide flexibility and also handle an estate, or what I call that legacy planning, your generational, multi-generational legacy. Bruce, I know we just have a minute here before we need to close up the podcast, but what would you say there's a lot of questions that we could use to wrap this episode. Let's do this. Let's kind of come to the reality check, the final moment of truth. So, what questions could someone use? Let's just give like three questions somebody could use to ask themselves or ask a financial advisor to uncover some of these blind spots in their retirement plan.
Number one is how are you going to do tax mitigation in retirement? Because if you can do tax mitigation, it's going to take part of the risk off into the future if taxes go up. So that would be the number one thing I think you should always ask. Matter of fact, I asked this question this past week or last week to that person that we were just talking about. And he said, funny you asked that. I just asked my financial advisor, and they said, oh, well, we're doing tax mitigation all the time. We're offsetting the losses in your portfolio with your gains in your portfolio. And I said, well, that means you have losses in your portfolio, you know? And he's like, yeah, and I thought that was kind of a weird answer. And so that would be the number one thing you should ask them. Number two is you should ask them, is how can you provide me with guaranteed income into the future? And some of them are going to say bonds. Well, bonds are only guaranteed the income through the duration of the bond. That's not for a lifetime. So you got to consider that. And then the final thing is how are you going to deal with sequence of return risk? I would say those are the three things that you should ask. Tax mitigation, you're going to ask
Guaranteed income.
guaranteed income, and you're going to ask as far as sequence of return risk.
Excellent. So let's just give a snapshot of what a healthy retirement plan really could look like when you look through this lens of control, certainty, multi-generational planning. Bruce, I'm just going to let you kind of give a really quick synopsis of what you would say is a really solid plan for, let's maybe not even take the word retirement, but what would be a really solid plan for future income?
Well, the plan starts with knowing where you are now and where you would like to be. Because you can't, matter of fact, Connor, one of my associates, and I just had a meeting the other day with somebody, and they said, um, build a plan for you got for me. I don't know if I want to become a client, but I just show me what you're going to do. And we said, well, how much money do you have in this account, this account, this account? He goes, I don't want to tell you. I just want to tell you that I have $1.7 million. Tell me what it is. Well, sir, we don't know how we can do this. Well, then I'm not going to work with you guys. So you have to know where you're starting before you can know where you're going. So you have to take a complete financial picture. And that complete financial picture means what money's in a taxable position, that when you make money that year, you have to pay taxes on it. What money's in a tax deferred position, which means you haven't paid taxes on it, but you're going to pay taxes on it in the future. And what money do you in a tax advantage or tax free position, so that you can access that at any time, according to the rules, tax free. Then you have to figure out where they are in the tax brackets, both now and in the future. And then you have to have cash flow. You have to figure out what their current cash flow is and what that cash flow will need to be into the future when they want to take passive income or when they want to retire. So to do that, then you actually have to ask them those life questions, because some people are risk averse. They don't want hardly any risk. Other people, um, yeah, I'll take some risk. I know by the time I'm 90, if I run out of most of my money, I've had clients say this. I'll be 90, I'll be sitting in my rocking chair anyway, and I'm not going to be doing anything. I'd rather spend my money in my 70s and risk, you know, not having any money in the 90s. I'm fine with that. Some people are
Until
like,
you get there.
yeah, well, yeah. I always say everybody's an aggressive investor until their account goes down.
Yeah.
Then they're not an aggressive investor anymore. But I mean,
Yeah.
you have to document this and you have to ask these questions, because I do think there are people that believe that. And I think there are people that when they get there, they would believe that. I think I'm like that. I want to just live life as much as I can now, and I'll deal with it in the future. Now I have plans to deal with it, but if it doesn't work out, that's fine. I'm fine. That's my personality. I don't I think that's more your personality. I'm not sure if it's Lucas's
You
personality.
got us pegged
Yeah.
pretty well. Yep.
Yeah. And so you have to ask these questions. And one of the ways I ask the question, and our listeners can ask themselves this question, is If you had a portfolio of $100,000 and in 1 week it went down by 20,000, or in 1 week it went up by 20,000, which one of those are you going to be bothered by if we said that you had to make a choice? We're going to put your money somewhere where instead of it going down by 20, it'll only go down by 10, but it can only go up by 10. It can't go up by 20. Which one's going to bother you more? And if a person says, well, I'd be bothered a lot more if I lost 20,000 than if I lost out on the opportunity of making 20,000. Well, those people are risk averse.
Yeah.
If they say, no, I'd be really upset if I could have made 20,000 and I didn't, even though I could have lost 20,000. So those are the kind of questions you have to ask yourself. And Rachel, to your point, you have to ask yourself if you really mean it. Because as I said, everybody's aggressive investor until they lose money.
Hmm.
Mike Tyson, the famous heavyweight boxer, says every boxer has a plan to win the match until he gets hit in the mouth, and then the plan goes awry. It's the same way
Hmm.
with investing.
Bruce, I mean, also just if somebody is walking away from this, I think one of the most important things to remember is those questions that you should ask your financial advisor or yourself to uncover those blind spots. I think those would be the same things that you would want to overlay on a healthy plan too. Do you have a plan for handling, let me try to go in the same order that you did, handling taxes in the future? Do you have a plan for um,
Guaranteed income.
guaranteed income? And do you have a plan to manage sequence of returns risk? Meaning if you lose account value early, do you have a plan for how you're going to access that account instead of hitting that dead horse while it's down?
Right.
If you would like to apply any of these concepts and principles to your financial life, where we said something today that really resonated with you and some of your goals for your financial future, we'd love to be a part of the conversation in helping you accomplish that. So you can go over to themoneyadvantage.com. You can book a call with our advisors, and we'd love to walk you through this process to really figure out how to put you in a position of maximum control and certainty so that you can feel really good about your plan for the future and not be stuck or not be building your plans on a shaky foundation, but accounting for all of those hidden risks and being in a position of overcoming them, not just ignoring them. Thank you so much for listening today. In closing, please remember success leaves clues. So model the successful few, not the crowd, and build a life and business you love. We'll see you next time.